The wind had a mournful sound that morning, as if the earth itself pitied her. Dust curled at Nalin's bare ankles where she stood on the auction platform. Her shadow stretched long and thin across the warped wood, tethered like a second soul. The boards creaked beneath her weight, or maybe it was the weight of their eyes, hundreds of them, watching her as if she were a carcass left too long in the sun. The sky was an iron-gray dome, clouds bunched like waiting fists above the town of Bramble Hollow. Somewhere a raven croaked. Somewhere else a child laughed, the sound sliced, wrong and out of place. Her belly swelled before her like a question no one wanted to answer. She didn't cradle it. She didn't flinch. She stood still, as her grandmother had taught her, like juniper in a storm, silent, upright, rooted in the invisible. The sheriff muttered instructions to the auctioneer, then stepped aside, hat tugged low, as if shame were something you could shield your eyes from. The townsfolk gathered with the small delight of people who believe they are not cruel, only curious. Women clutched their rosaries tighter. Men chewed tobacco and leaned against posts. A few boys climbed barrels to get a better look, pointing and snickering. Pregnant and pretty, if you like that kind of wild thing, the auctioneer barked, waving his arm like he was introducing a steer. Navajo, about 20 summers, I'd wager. Silent but sound. Nalin said nothing. She didn't need to. Her silence was not submission. It was survival. The man beside her, rail-thin and reeking of whiskey, had claimed her as his property after she was turned out. He'd traded her presence for debts at the saloon, telling her with a snort that any man fool enough to father a red-skinned brat ought to pay for it one way or another. That had been weeks ago, or longer. Time passed like wind in her mind now. Not something to count, only something to endure. She looked out over the crowd and let her gaze pass through them like smoke. None would meet her eyes. Not even the ones who might have once been kind. Not now. Not when decency came with a price. But one man did not look away. He stood beyond the crowd, just past the edge of the hitching posts, half-shadowed beneath a slanting porch beam. He wore no hat. His dark hair was braided in a loop down his back, leather cords tied at the ends. His clothing was buckskin old, but clean, and around his neck hung a strand of carved bone beads. His face was unreadable. Not cold. Not pitying. Just still, like a canyon lake holding the sky. Her breath caught without reason. Just a small hitch in her chest. She dropped her gaze quickly. It meant nothing. Men looked all the time. The auctioneer began the bidding. A few voices rose. $10. $12. Someone joked about getting 2 mouths for the price of 1. Laughter like gravel. A woman gasped somewhere and was quickly hushed. Nalin stared straight ahead. Her feet were numb. Her legs ached. The child inside her shifted, not a kick, just a roll, as if even the little one knew to stay quiet. Then silence. A gap. The kind of pause that doesn't come from confusion, but from discomfort. She turned her head slightly. The man from the porch had stepped forward. He held nothing in his hands. No weapon. No coin. Just a small medicine bundle, cedar and cloth tied with sinew. He walked without rush and placed it gently at the base of the platform. A ripple moved through the crowd. The auctioneer blinked. "That's not money, Red. We ain't trading ghost stories today." Still, the man said nothing. Then softly he spoke. "She is not yours to sell." The words were plain. No fire in them. No performance. Just a simple truth laid down like a stone across a river. The auctioneer blinked, laughed, then turned to the sheriff. "Is this your idea of law now? We letting savages walk in and make claims like prophets?" The sheriff did not answer. He scratched his beard and looked away. A few men stepped forward, puffed with the importance cruelty gives. One spat near the warrior's foot. Another muttered about savages breeding like coyotes. The man remained unmoved, his hands at his sides. He wasn't large, but something about him filled space, like a tree grown in the exact place lightning meant to strike. Nalin felt her hands curl beneath her shawl. Not from fear, from memory. That feeling again. Not safety, exactly, but the suggestion of it. like when thunder rolled far away and you knew the storm would not hit you. Not yet. The crowd had grown unsure. Someone whispered, "He's Cheyenne." Another hissed, "What's he want with her?" The auctioneer raised his voice. "You can't just walk in and—" "She is carrying life," the man said, cutting clean through the air. "Not shame." No one laughed. And then, without signal or cue, Nalin stepped down. Just one step. Just enough to make the platform groan and the auctioneer flinch. The man didn't reach for her. He didn't move at all. But she saw the way his eyes softened when she looked at him full for the first time. Not wide-eyed. Not pleading. Just present. Around them, Bramble Hollow held its breath. She felt it then. A flutter low in her belly. A kick. Strong and sure. She placed her hand there, not to hide, but to show. The blanket fell away from her shoulders. And she said, in a voice that hadn't been used in days, "This child will not be bought." The words surprised even her. But they stood now, between her and the past, like a wall built of wind and will. The auctioneer cursed and stepped back. "This ain't no sanctuary. This ain't how it works." But it was already done. No man stepped forward again. The moment had passed like a storm that chose a different path. The warrior turned and began to walk, slow and sure, into the fading light. And Nalin, barefoot and bruised, followed him. Not because she was owned. Not because she was rescued. Because she chose to. The wind carried their footprints away behind them. And the sky, that low, silver sky, began to weep. They left the town with no words between them. Behind them, Bramble Hollow shrank beneath the shroud of a rising wind, its buildings leaning like tired bones, its people watching from behind lace curtains and half-shut doors. No one stopped them. Not the sheriff. Not the men who'd placed their bets. Shame is a heavy thing. Heavier still when it wears a face. The warrior walked with quiet certainty, never looking back. Nalin followed, one hand on the curve of her belly, the other holding her shawl tight against the gusts. Her feet ached from the platform's rough boards, but the earth beneath her now felt different, not softer, but real, like it belonged to her again. They did not speak for miles. The land stretched out before them in quiet desolation, dry grass dancing in golden waves, scrub cedar huddled low, and distant mesas standing like forgotten gods. The road dissolved into nothing, just earth and instinct guiding their steps. Birds wheeled above them. Somewhere a hawk cried, a sharp, fierce sound that lingered long after its wings vanished into sky. She studied him from behind, broad shoulders beneath his weathered tunic, a braid like black river stone falling to the middle of his back. He moved like someone used to being alone, but not lost. There was no urgency in him, only rhythm. Nalin had known men who talked endlessly, men who filled silence with stories, commands, lies. This one didn't speak at all, and in that quiet, she felt something strange begin to breathe. Not trust, not yet, but the memory of it. By late afternoon, her legs trembled. He noticed, said nothing, just turned toward her eyes and gestured toward a stand of cottonwoods. There, he built a fire from dry bark and sagebrush. Laid it with care, not haste. She sat cross-legged across from him, tucking her shawl around her knees. The firelight warmed her swollen feet. Her breath came easier. He unhooked a water skin from his belt and passed it to her. She took it without speaking. The water was cool, faintly sweet. She drank slow. Then, finally, she asked, "Why did you do it?" The question hung between them like smoke. He didn't look at her. He fed another branch into the flames. After a pause, he answered, "There was a girl once, my sister, taken from our village during the hunger winters. I was young, could not stop it. The fire popped. Ash drifted. When I saw you on that platform," he continued, voice low, "I saw her. But I also saw someone who had not given up. You were still standing." Nalin lowered her gaze. She remembered standing on the platform, head high, but inside, she'd felt like ash. Empty. Floating. He unrolled a small pouch and laid out dried meat and flatbread, broke the bread in two, and offered her half. She took it. The bread was coarse, but real. Warmth spread through her chest. Not from food, but from the act. "You're Cheyenne," she said quietly. He nodded. "My name is Nalin," she offered, not because he asked, but because the silence had earned it. "Tasani," he replied. The fire danced between them, its light turning his features into warm bronze and soft shadow. His face held strength, but not the kind that needed proving. His hands were calloused, scarred in places. A hunter, maybe, or someone who'd lived long enough to stop running. Nalin leaned back against a stone and let the ache drain from her limbs. The baby shifted. She laid a hand over the movement. "They would have sold me for $12, she said, more to herself than him. He looked at her now. His eyes did not flinch. "No one can price a storm," he said. She blinked, startled by the words. He went on. "They can fear it, try to hide from it, but they cannot own it. And you are a storm." It wasn't flattery. It wasn't comfort. It was a simple recognition, spoken like a man describing the sky. She felt tears press behind her eyes. But they didn't fall. She was too tired for crying, too full of things unnamed. Later, when the fire burned low and dusk wrapped around them like wool, he took a small flute from his satchel, carved bone, wrapped in sinew. Without a word, he played. The notes were simple, old. They moved like river water, gentle and sure. A lullaby not meant for children, but for memories, for healing. Nalin closed her eyes. Let the sound wash over her. She imagined the wind weaving through canyons, the cry of coyotes far off. Her grandmother's voice whispering stories about women made of wind, women who carried thunder in their wombs. The child inside her kicked, strong and rhythmic, as if moved by the music. She placed both hands on her belly and whispered a blessing under her breath. She did not know if he heard. But when she opened her eyes, his gaze was on her, not hungry, not hesitant, just present, like he'd been waiting for her to see him too. Night folded around them, stitched with stars. They did not touch. There was no need. The distance between them had changed. Not closed, but softened, like the first melt of frost in spring. And somewhere deep in Nalin's chest, something cracked open. Not pain, not love, the possibility of it. She lay down on the earth, wrapped in her shawl, and listened to the wind sighing through the trees. Sleep came without struggle. And for the first time in many moons, she did not dream of running. She dreamed of standing still, beside someone who did not flinch when the world turned cruel. The next morning came veiled in mist, the kind that softened edges and made the world seem like it had not yet made up its mind to be cruel again. Nalin stirred beneath the shawl, the soil beneath her body still warm from the fire's memory. Her eyes opened slowly, as if waking meant stepping back into something she wasn't quite ready to carry. But the child stirred too, a firm nudge beneath her ribs, reminding her there was no pause in becoming. Life went on, even when the heart wanted stillness. Tasani was already awake, sitting a little ways off, back straight, legs crossed, flute resting idle in his lap. He didn't look at her, but somehow, she knew he was aware she'd risen. His presence was like the wind, quiet, constant, and always there, even when you didn't look for it. They did not speak. Instead, they began to walk. Their journey was not rushed. There was no destination spoken aloud, no trail carved by wagon or horse. Only the hush of dry grass brushing against their ankles, and the long shadows cast by cottonwoods they passed in silence. The world opened wide around them, sky the color of wet ash, clouds curling like smoke from an unseen fire. Nalin moved slower now. The child within her was heavy, and her strength thinned quicker with each mile. But she did not complain. She had already learned that pain, when carried without resistance, became something quieter, something almost like prayer. That day, they crossed a dry riverbed, the rocks smooth and sun-bleached. Nalin stopped at the bottom, her breath short, hand pressed against her lower back. She bent slightly, waiting for the wave of tightness in her belly to pass. Tasani turned back. He didn't speak. He simply reached into his pouch and pulled out a small bundle of dried berries. He offered them without explanation. She took them. They tasted sharp and sweet, a shock of life on her tongue. Afterward, they rested beneath a lone juniper. Its twisted branches spread above them like a grandmother's arms, protective, weathered, full of stories it would never speak aloud. Nalin sat on the ground, knees pulled close, breath finally steady. Tisani knelt nearby, cutting thin strips of rawhide with a blade that had seen many winters. The blade caught the sun now and then, flashing like a wink from fate. She watched him for a while, then asked, "Do you believe in signs?" He didn't pause in his work. Not the kind that speak with fire. But yes. She tilted her head. What kind then? He looked up. The quiet kind. When the birds stop singing. When your horse doesn't drink. When someone appears in the moment just before you break. Her lips parted, but no answer came. Just a silence that swelled like tidewater. Later, as dusk gathered, Tisani led her toward a low ridge, where the land opened into a long valley, cradled by red cliffs. The wind sang here, low and mournful. The rocks seemed to hum with memory. He pointed toward a notch between two boulders. "We stay here tonight." Inside, the earth dipped into a small hollow, soft with moss and the remains of old fires. It felt like someone had once loved this place, left warmth behind on purpose. Nalin settled into the hollow and lay back, her head resting on a folded blanket he gave her. The baby rolled again, restless beneath her ribs. She exhaled slowly, eyes tracing the shapes of stars just beginning to wake. Tisani sat across from her, silent, steady. "Tell me," she said, her voice barely more than breath, "what your sister's name was." His gaze lifted to the sky. "Atsa." She waited. He didn't continue. After a while she whispered, "Did you love her?" More silence. Then, with a weight that bent the air, he said, "She was light, even in sorrow. I remember her laughter more than her voice." Nalin closed her eyes. "I had a husband once." She didn't expect herself to say it, but the words came anyway. "He was not cruel. Not at first. He gave me tea, carved me a comb from cedar. But when I told him I carried his child," she swallowed hard, "he turned to salt, stiff and cold. He said I was trying to trap him, that I was using the baby to climb into his world." She opened her eyes. He left that night. Didn't even take his coat. Tisani did not speak. But in his stillness, she felt no judgment. Only listening. "I was someone's wife," she said. "Now I'm no one's anything." Tisani's voice came quiet, like smoke. "That is a lie someone else told you." She looked at him. The firelight caught the planes of his face, the tired wisdom in his eyes. "You are the land," he said. "Not a guest. Not an orphan. Not less." Her throat tightened. Her body, already swollen and aching, felt too full, not with sorrow, but with something heavier. Recognition. The ache of being seen. She didn't cry, but she wanted to. That night, she dreamed of thunder, not the kind that brings fear, but the kind that rolls across the sky like a drumbeat, steady and deep. In the dream, she stood barefoot on red stone, her belly round, her hair lifted by wind. All around her, women stood in a circle, faces she did not know, but somehow remembered. One of them, old, eyes lined like dried riverbeds, touched Nalin's hands and said, "You carry more than blood. You carry mercy." She woke before dawn, breath caught, heart racing. But when she sat up, Tisani was there, not asleep, not startled, just watching the horizon, waiting for the sun. She didn't speak, but when he stood and offered his hand, she took it. Not because she was weak, not because she was lost, because sometimes mercy arrives in the shape of a man who says nothing, but stays. The sky had turned to copper by the time they reached the canyon. It opened without warning, a narrow cut between blood-red cliffs, lined with cottonwoods and shadowed silence. The wind shifted as they stepped inside, cooler, wrapped in the hush of something sacred. It wasn't marked by stone carvings or fences, but Nalin felt it at once. This was not just land. This was a place that remembered. Tisani walked a step ahead, slowing now reverent. His shoulders loosened, as if some unseen burden had been laid down at the canyon's edge. The trail turned narrow and wound beside a trickling spring that laughed to itself over stone. The smell of sage was thick, the kind that settles deep in your chest like memory. At the bend, a small shelter came into view. Not a house, not a hut, but something simpler. Poles and hides stretched beneath a rock ledge, softened with woven mats and fur. Smoke curled from a nearby fire pit. Someone waited there. An old woman. She rose slowly, hands spotted with time, wrapped in a shawl of rust and ochre. Her hair was long and white, braided neatly, her eyes dark and steady as dusk. She did not speak when she saw them. She only nodded, first to Tasani, then to Nalin, her gaze drifting to the swell beneath the young woman's shawl. Nalin felt herself go still. The old woman did not ask for names, did not pry. She reached out, touched 2 fingers lightly to Nalin's cheek, and smiled. That small gesture undid something. Not all the way, but enough. They sat by the fire that evening, the 3 of them. The canyon walls held the warmth, and the stars came early. The old woman, whose name was Sutta, ladled broth from a clay pot and pressed a bowl into Nalin's hands. It smelled of root and wild onion, earthy and healing. She sipped slowly, and the warmth traced the hollow places inside her, places that had forgotten what welcome felt like. Tasani said little, only sat close enough to feel near, but not so near as to crowd. His presence was a quiet heartbeat beside her own. Later, Sutta spread a woven shawl across Nalin's shoulders, soft, warm, edged with tiny feathers stitched by hand. For a sister, she said. Not a patient, not a stranger, a sister. Nalin blinked fast and looked away. The next days passed in slow rhythm. The canyon did not rush them. The wind whispered through tall grass, birds nested in the cottonwoods, and the stream sang without end. Tasani worked nearby, sharpening tools, cleaning hides, carrying water. Sutta gathered herbs and taught Nalin their names, medicine for birth, for bleeding, for fear. She showed her how to grind them with stone, how to listen for the root's readiness. It was the first time in many moons Nalin had used her hands for something other than defense. She remembered her grandmother's teachings, buried deep beneath the ache of survival, now rising like spring water. At night, Sutta told stories beside the fire, not loud or grand, but slow and rich, of women who turned into coyotes to save their children, of trees that wept when daughters left home, of storms that came not to destroy, but to cleanse. Nalin listened, the baby pressing gently beneath her ribs, as if it too were listening. One evening, as the canyon glowed gold with setting sun, Tasani returned from hunting with a rabbit and a handful of wild plums. He laid them near the fire and sat beside Nalin, closer than before. They ate without words. Afterward, he looked at her, not with question, not with expectation. "May I braid your hair?" he asked. Her heart gave a single, uncertain beat. She nodded. She sat with her back to him, legs folded, hair loose over her shoulders. His fingers were slow, sure. He didn't tug. He didn't rush. He parted and wove each section with care, pausing now and then to smooth stray strands. It wasn't just a braid. It was attention, patient and quiet, with no other motive than presence. When he finished, she touched the end. A bone bead, carved with a tiny sun, had been tucked into the final loop. "I carved it," he said softly, "for strength." She did not thank him. That word felt too small. Instead, she turned, met his gaze, and said, "You remind me of rain after fire." He blinked just once. Then, for the first time, he smiled. A full, open smile that cracked something inside her she hadn't known was still frozen. That night, she slept in the shelter beneath the ledge, her body cradled in furs, belly full, heart quiet. Dreams came again, not of thunder this time, but of soft rain falling on canyon stone, a cradle of light beneath a shelter made of song and sky. She dreamed of her child, born beneath stars, wrapped in the shawl of a sister, cradled by hands that did not flinch. And in that dream, she was not alone. It began with hoofbeats. Not thunder, not yet, just the sound of horses over dry stone, a cadence too fast, too many, too loud for peace. The kind of sound that made animals scatter, made the birds go silent. The kind of sound that summoned ghosts. Nalin heard it first. She was kneeling by the stream, washing a bundle of Sutta's herbs, the water cool and green. The moment it reached her ears, she froze. A stillness deeper than fear settled into her bones. Tasani stepped out from the canyon trail seconds later, bow in hand. His eyes met hers across the stream. No words passed between them. There was no need. They both knew. Trouble had found them. Sudha rose from the fire pit with the slow grace of someone who'd seen many storms and knew not all of them could be outrun. She handed Nalin the shawl without speaking. Her touch lingered at Nalin's wrist, a silent promise. The riders arrived with dust and swagger. 6 men, faces smeared with travel, eyes full of the kind of hunger that had nothing to do with food. The sheriff wasn't among them. These weren't lawmen. These were men who believed in the law of ownership, who saw Nalin not as a person, but as unfinished business. And among them at the front, still dressed in a once fine coat that didn't quite fit his shame, was the man who'd left her. He dismounted with a grunt, boots striking the earth like claims. His eyes slid over the canyon like it offended him, but they settled on her belly like it still belonged to him. "You look fatter than I remember," he said, voice sharp with false levity. Nalin stood straight. She said nothing, not because she was afraid, but because his words didn't reach her anymore. Tasani stepped between them, quiet as a shadow, bow low but ready. The others fanned out behind the first man, hands near their pistols, but not yet drawn. The tension in the air was brittle. One breath too sharp, one twitch too fast, and it would all break. "We're here for what's ours," one of the men called, looking around the canyon with disdain. "You think you can just take her? Hide her here like some wounded fawn?" Tasani's voice was calm, steady. "She is not yours." The man barked a laugh. "She's carrying my blood. That makes her mine." At that, Nalin stepped forward. Not behind Tasani. Not beside him. Ahead. She walked slow, the red canyon earth warm beneath her bare feet. Her shawl fluttered with the wind. She stopped only a breath away from the man who had once called her wife. "You left me in the cold," she said. "You walked away with nothing but a curse under your breath. You said I was dirt, that I'd ruined your name." The man stiffened, but she did not give him space to speak. "You don't get to come back because the shame caught up with you. You don't get to wear pride now like a badge just because you've realized the child is real." Her voice did not shake. "This baby will never know you." The words dropped like stones. The men behind him stirred. One muttered under his breath. Another shifted his weight like he didn't want to be standing there anymore. The wind picked up, curling through the canyon with a low moan. Tasani stepped to her side, but he did not speak. His presence alone was enough, a silent wall of certainty. The first man's jaw clenched. His pride didn't know how to bleed without drawing blood from something else. His hand twitched toward his belt. But then came the sound no one could mistake. Thunder. It rolled through the canyon like a voice. Long and low. It didn't crash, it warned. A sound that made even the horses flinch and the wind bow low. The sky had darkened behind them. Clouds churned above the cliffs, bruised and heavy. Lightning danced like quicksilver beyond the ridge. And the air changed. It carried weight, memory, judgment. Sudha stepped from the shelter, her staff in hand. She stood tall, eyes fixed not on the men, but the sky, as if reading it like scripture. "You've brought fear here," she said, not loudly, but with power. "And fear does not belong in a place made for healing." The wind answered her. The first drops fell, fat, cold, slow. One landed on Nalin's cheek, like a kiss from something far older than fury. One of the men backed toward his horse. "We should go," he muttered. But the first man shook his head, anger now louder than reason. "You think you can steal my child and hide behind weather and women?" Lightning tore the sky. And that was when Nalin raised her voice again, not in anger, not in rage, but in finality. "I am not hiding. I was waiting for a man who would not flinch, who would not bargain with my worth. I was waiting to stop surviving and start being." She turned slightly, her hand finding Tasani's. He did not squeeze it. He didn't need to. The man looked at her, then him. And he saw something he didn't understand, something not rooted in possession or power, something far beyond his reach. He spat, but the spit didn't make it to the ground. The wind took it. He turned, climbed into his saddle, and did not look back. The others followed. Their hoofbeats faded, swallowed by thunder, by rain, by silence. When the last of them had gone, Nalin let her breath out. She didn't know she'd been holding it. The rain fell in earnest now, soaking the ground, turning dust to scent, memory to life. She stepped into the open and tilted her face to the sky. Her hands moved to her belly. The child was quiet now, peaceful, as if it too had heard the storm and decided it no longer needed to be afraid. That night, the labor began. The rain fell steady as breath while the fire was lit. Sutta moved with certainty, placing herbs, singing low. Tasani waited outside, his head bowed beneath the ledge, not in fear, but in reverence. Nalin cried out only once, a sound like grief and glory braided together. And then, as dawn broke over the wet stone, a cry rose into the morning. The child, a girl, was born with her fists closed tight, her mouth wide with life, her lungs eager to be known. Sutta placed her in Nalin's arms, wrapped in the same shawl of rust and ochre. Outside, Tasani turned at the sound. His hands trembled when he entered, and when Nalin looked up, her eyes were shining with more than pain. He came to her slowly, knees in the wet earth. She placed the child in his arms. "She has your stillness," Nalin whispered, "and your strength." He looked down at the child, his brow furrowing like the earth before it blooms. Then, for the first time in a long, long while, his shoulders shook. The baby stared up at him, wide-eyed, full of breath and promise. And in that sacred silence, Nalin reached for his hand. He took it, not because she was broken, not because she was his to save, but because between thunder and mercy, something had been born, a family, and far above them, the sky began to clear.